There we go. As we talk about America becoming an imperialistic nation, we have to remember this idea of manifest destiny. It's the idea that America, we have this belief that we are a chosen people. We have a special destiny that has been ordained by God to move across all of the continental United States, which we have, and to spread the government theory of democracy right here. We came to America, first Columbus, and then explorers, and then the Pilgrims, and then many others from Europe. And we came for religious freedom. That was one of the reasons why. We came to own property and build new lives. And as the original 13 states were founded, they all established state governments that were democracies or representative democracies. And eventually we came together as a nation. We got our independence from England. And after some more wars with Spain and the French, and we've had these continuing battles with the Native Americans, we came to embrace this idea that we are a special people that came to this continent, discovered this new world, and we are now to basically conquer all of this land and spread democracy. So that's what manifest destiny is. Now we're going to go back to the other slides. And as average Americans are carving out states over here in the West, and farms are cropping up, cities are cropping up, states are being added to the union. The government, we're like, this is my paraphrase, but all of this land is now ours. How can we expand more? Manifest destiny. How can we acquire more territory? And how can we spread the teaching of democracy for all the world to enjoy? There was also we briefly talked about Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. And remember how some sociologists applied it to society. They said that societies and culture are like biology. They evolve and change also. One of the results of that thinking was that the Anglo-Saxon Caucasian race was the superior race on the planet, white Europeans. And the culture and civilization that had formed in America, white European, democratic, representative government, and then religiously, what was the dominant religion? Somebody can share what it was.
Protestant.
Protestant or Christianity, right? But Protestant Christianity would even be more correct because Catholics were looked down upon, generally speaking. But Christianity, representation and democracy, capitalism, laissez-faire economics. We talked about laissez-faire. This is these are the characteristics of the Anglo-Saxon race that has settled, and coming from the roots of the Puritans and Pilgrims, just as Israel was brought out of Egypt and they were God's chosen people, now America is God's new chosen people to spread these characteristics of the United States of America, politically, religiously, culturally. All right, I said a lot there, but what we're going to look at is we're going to start with Pacific expansion. So before we jump in, any questions on this idea of manifest destiny and for the most part, average Americans, they just wanted to live their lives. They wanted to kind of be isolationists. They didn't want to be involved anymore in wars with other countries and those types of things. But there were a few still in the government and in places of power and influence that reimagined this idea of manifest destiny. So the first part of this imperialism that we want to look at is our expanding in the Pacific area. And this is what we're going to look at this morning. Alaska, the Hawaiian Islands.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You say America is new God's chosen people instead of whatever.
Okay, what about that?
Is America God's chosen people? Is that what you said about manifest destiny?
That was manifest destiny. One of the things that helped create manifest destiny was the religious beliefs of the Puritans and the Pilgrims in Massachusetts, who when they came in 1620, in 1630, they believed that God had led them there just like he led Israel out of Egypt into the promised land. They believed God led them out of Europe across the ocean to this new unoccupied frontier wilderness called the New World. So that idea, which just came from that little religious group, was one of the things about manifest destiny. Does that clear that up?
Yes.
Because manifest destiny wasn't just a religious thing, it was also about our type of government, our type of economy, and then of course the idea that the belief that the Caucasian race was superior. So and just kind of mix all those things together, and you have basically early American culture. So in Pacific expansion, we're going to look at our acquisition of Alaska, Hawaii, the Philippine Islands, and Guam. Now you can read about all these other islands in the textbook as you read chapter 19. So you can see we added Alaska just 2 years after the Civil War ended in 1867. Does anybody remember how much we purchased the Louisiana Purchase for? The Louisiana Purchase was basically, as you can see my arrow here, going up Louisiana and then just kind of going this way and then along here. I can't remember the exact price right off the top of my head, but we got it at a great deal. Well, we got
$15 million.
How much?
$15 million.
15 million. Thank you. That was a great deal back around 1800. A lot of land. Now in 1867, William Seward leads in the acquisition of Alaska from Russia. We paid $7.2 million for Alaska. But most Americans felt like that was a silly thing to do because it's basically an ice box up there in Alaska. So it was called Seward's Folly because Seward was the one who persuaded the government to purchase it. However, once we started getting settlers up there and prospectors, we discovered that there was a lot of good timber. Looky here, there's gold in Alaska also, as well as minerals and oil. And so it became a very, very good purchase. It also gave us territory that was once owned by Russia. So it moved Russia a little farther away, only about 17 miles between one of these points in Russia, the Bering Strait. But it gave us land that was closer to Russia. So that was 1867. Now, because of our trading with China and India, we had become aware of these islands in the Pacific called the Hawaiian Islands. Move you guys over here. Let me go back up to this map. This is how far Hawaii is from the continental United States. So we are sending ships across the Pacific to China and India, all the way across here. And this would be a good place to for ships to restock and for the sailors to rest. And so we became interested in Hawaii. Now, I don't think I shared this in module 1, but you need to remember this. This is what my high school history teacher taught us, and it's always stuck with me, and it's very true. What makes the world go round? Does anybody know? And I'm not talking about
Money.
money. Thank you. Did I share that before, or you just heard that before?
I just heard it before.
Okay.
Grew up.
Money makes the world go round. We're not talking physically and geographically. We're talking culturally, politically. And while these would have been a good staging area for our ships to restock, sailors to rest, U.S. business owners, money, led to the overthrow of Queen, I'm just going to call her Lily for short, the Queen of Hawaii. And then the business owners asked the government to annex Hawaii. Annex basically means just to take it and add it on to what you already have. President McKinley finally agreed to a treaty to annex Hawaii, and Hawaii was annexed in 1898. It was proclaimed by Congress eventually to be a U.S. territory. The question is sometimes asked, were we simply expanding or were we being imperialistic? I think the answer is we were acting more imperialistically. We may have been expanding during these times with always a hint of imperialism, but now as we get to these areas, which are not a part of the continental United States, I think it's safe to say that imperialism was more of the factor than expansion. So 1867, Alaska, 1898, Hawaii, and then also around the time of Hawaii, the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. And this is a result of the Spanish-American War. So let's talk about that, as Teddy Roosevelt called it, that splendid little war in 1898. Before this war, though, we want to look at the precursors to what led to this war. First of all, again, money. American businesses had economic interests in Cuba. There were American businessmen or American entrepreneurs who owned sugar plantations in Cuba. Cuba is about 90 miles southeast of Florida. As you can see here, actually southwest to southeast. And we had citizens that had sugar plantations, and we had those that found the materials to produce rubber, and they were plentiful on Cuba. So one of the reasons that led up to this war is we want, there are some citizens who want our government to protect our interests. Let me jump down here a little bit. I should have this slide up here. Spain was one of those empires I mentioned earlier, but they were slowly falling apart. At one time, Spain had controlled much of the Americas, but by the late 19th century, Spain only had a few colonies, such as Cuba, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. They had others, but these three were wanting to break away and become independent. Now, if there's anybody who knows about that, it should be the United States of America. It's just been a little over 100 years since we broke away from England and declared ourselves independent. That's what these countries want to do. So Cuba, which is the closest to us, farmers in Cuba started to resist Spanish control and fight with the Spanish governors and leaders to exert their independence. So this alarmed American business owners who had the sugar cane and rubber in Cuba. And so they wanted our government to help the Cuban farmers against the Spanish government to gain their independence. All right, there that is. So we supported the rebels, although we did not want to get involved in a, we didn't want to see a war. We sent a battleship to Cuba to basically be in the harbor of Havana. And on February 15th, 1898, this battleship, the USS Maine, exploded. And even though we know now that the Spanish did not bomb it, there was an accident on board. At the time, we thought it was a result of the Spanish, and that led us to go to war with Spain. "266 sailors died because of that accident." And even though at that time we didn't know for sure if they did it or didn't do it, there were those in our government who wanted to go to war. They wanted to acquire, they wanted to acquire Cuba as a U.S. territory. Finally, our president gave in to the calls for war. One of the rallying cries was, "Remember the Maine." And in 1898, we went to war. Another important reason that led to war was yellow journalism. Make sure you know what yellow journalism is. As we were leading up to war, and then as the war started, there were two main newspapers in America that were reporting on the war. they were in a competition with each other. See who could sell more papers. And so as they reported on these relationships and these incidences with the Spanish, they would often write articles or headlines that were very sensationalized. They were trying to write stories that would attract more readers and sell more papers. Yellow journalism is exciting but sensational stories that are printed by a paper, as I said, to attract more readers and sell more papers. So we go to war, and as we go to war with Spain, not only are we fighting over Cuba, but we are fighting for another Spanish territory called the Philippines. The Philippines. And so this war was fought in two places, Cuba and the Philippines. And with that, we will stop and pick up there on Wednesday. Are there any other questions about what we went over? So hopefully you realize from the test that reading the chapters is very important, because there's no way I can cover everything in the times that we have together. So make sure you read the chapters, fill in the gaps from because I'm kind of going by a big outline, how the chapter is set apart in sections. And always, feel free to ask any questions you have from what I talk about or what you read about in the reading. So any questions before we close?
No.
I will have slides and video up this afternoon, and whoever it was and how, I will open that test back up by 2 here in 10 minutes. All right, have a great Tuesday. We'll see you on Wednesday.